Hello, welcome to Turn and Burn UK. Today I'm going to be turning this piece of oak that's been rescued off of the timber pile, off of the wood pile, into a winged bowl. You can see there's a nice bit of burring on the centre of the bowl there, and I'm hoping that when we hollow it out we'll be able to see those nice pearly burrs in the bottom of the pot. I'm stood out the way of the lathe as we start the lathe for the first time. That's just to make sure that I don't that should the timber come off, it doesn't hit me. Now I know it's safe and the speed is set to the right speed. I'm just bringing up the banjo and setting out the tool rest. It's worth taking your time here just to make sure that the tool rest isn't interfering with the timber. As you can see, this is quite a funny shaped bit of timber, so it takes a little while just to fine tune where it's going to be. So I'm putting on a pair of fingerless gloves here. These are site work gloves. They're nice and tight to the hands, so there's no chance of them getting caught on the timber, and there's no fingers, which are the one area that are at risk. These gloves just protect me from flying bits of bark as we're just starting to rough down, and then as you're actually turning the timber itself, sometimes the shavings can come off and they're quite warm, so it just protects the hands a wee bit. Just making sure the chuck's nice and tight. Just using the Crown cryogenic 1/2 inch bowl gouge here to shape the outside of the bowl. The extra mass of steel in this 1/2 inch bowl gouge just helps reduce the vibration. Most of the time the tool is actually cutting air. There's only a small amount of timber that is that's being cut on those outside wings. Just measuring up the tenon now for the chuck. The diameter of the tenon on this is about 55 mil, and I've put a second step just behind that tenon, and that will be where the chuck jaws register. So the jaws will hold the tenon, and then the second step is where the face of the jaw sits. That ensures that the piece of wood is sitting flush onto the chuck. Just dry checking, make sure it's the right size. I noticed that the timber on that tenon was slightly pucky, so we're just going to reshape it a wee bit, make the tenon just that little bit deeper. There's enough waste behind the tenon there to allow me to shape that into the bottom of a wobble bowl when we remove the tenon, which you'll see later on in the video. Just making a push cut here. The bevel of the gouge is supporting the fibres of the timber as we make that cut, which prevents the timber from tearing out and gives you a nice finish. There's a lot of hand sanding on this project. It's really just not safe to be trying to sand with the timber turning on the lathe. I've just turned the very bottom of the bowl with the sandpaper and the lathe running. The rest of it was all done manually. We're just applying some sanding sealer. This is the Chestnut Products cellulose sanding sealer, which is going on neat. A little bit of microcrystalline wax just to protect the outside finish while we swap it round. So that's the timber being held in the chuck. I've just brought up the tailstock to make sure that it's all nice and central. I'll take the tailstock away and remove the faceplate ring. I use 50mm screws to hold the faceplate ring on. If I was doing a small bowl, I'd probably only use about 25mm, but as a lot of this timber is going to be turned away to produce that winged effect, there's no concern about leaving holes in the timber. As there's going to be a lid in the bottom of this bowl, I'm just using the parting tool just to put in the shelf where the lid will sit, and now we've started to hollow out the bottom of the bowl. This is where that nice little bit of oak bearing will be, and forms a nice little surprise when you take the lid off. Just checking the wings there, make sure there's no uneven bumps on the wings where I've just been running the bowl gouge down. Sharpening the edge of that lip for the bowl to sit. This is just really refining the shape now. And then back to hand sanding. I've had to swap over to the DeWalt drill as I've run out of battery packs on the Makita. Again, using the Simon Hope sanding arbors. Running through the grits 120 to 400. Then use the Chestnut Products web pads just to do that final bit of sanding. It's important when sanding to make sure you remove the sanding marks from the previous grit before you move on. And I use a tack cloth just to remove any dust or any bits of abrasive that are left within the timber before moving on. Especially when working with open timber like oak, there's quite a lot of open grain that those little bits of abrasive could get caught into. And then no matter how careful you are with the next grit down, you'll still leave the marks. Just noted that corner, there's a small splinter where the oak's starting to move. If I don't clean it off now, there's a chance that it'll get caught on the buffing wheels later on. It's just a final check and a final sand just to make those those corners nice and sharp. You'll note that I've got all the grits of the abrasive stacked on top of one another, and just remove each one as I go down through the grit. Just using the tack cloth here to clean it up, and then cellulose sanding sealer. What are you sanding? Just denibbing that cellulose sanding sealer with the orange Nyweb pad. And that's the bowl finished. Next stage is to remove the tenon from the bottom, and to do that I'm going to use jam chuck. This is a piece of timber that I've turned specifically for removing tenons from the bottom of odd shaped bowls. It's a nice dome on the top there, and this is a bit of wadding just to protect the two pieces of timber. Just bring the tailstock up now. Now you don't want to bring the tailstock too tight, but you need there to be enough tension to prevent the bowl from sticking and slipping when you apply the tool. I'm just using the Robert Sorby modular tool rest system here. This is a great system. You've got one stem, and then you can get different size rests to screw onto the stem. I'm just swapping over for a smaller rest. This allows me to get that a little bit closer into the bowl and take the tenon off. You really want to be working as close to the centre of your tool rest at all times. The further away from the tool rest you are, the more stress you've got on the edges of the rest, and that's how people can end up snapping the tool rest off the post. I'm just checking to make sure that there's clearance all the way around, nothing sticking, there's no chance of damaging this piece. Just taking away the tenon now. Gentle cuts, just to leave a small nib of timber. This isn't the time for heroics. If you don't feel confident going down to a very small nib, leave a larger nib and remove it with a saw, and then you can sand afterwards. Just finishing with some more hand sanding, just refining the shape of the base there. Gone through the sanding, using my web pads. I'm just going to use a tack cloth to remove any final bits of dust, and then we'll put the sanding sealer on. Okay, so all the projects are finished now. Unfortunately, the batteries ran out on the phone, so I'm unable to show you the turning of the lid and finial. The lid you can see there is turned from walnut, and the finial from oak. Oak is a very challenging timber to use for turning finials because it's quite open grain. You've got to be very delicate with your tooling. I'm just using the Chestnut Products buffing system here. Just starting with the B wheel That's just to remove any slight imperfections left by any sanding sealer that hasn't been denibbed properly. And this will start to bring a shine to the timber. Generally you can run them up to 1500 RPM. When I was buffing the finial there, I was running at about 900 RPM. And here on the bowl itself, I'm working at about 1200 RPM. You can see the shine starting to develop here. Once we've used the B wheel, we run on to the C wheel, and that's where we apply the wax. I've used a microcrystalline stick wax, and that just brings the shine up. Microcrystalline melts at a higher temperature, which means there's less chance of the wax melting and leaving fingerprints in the finished piece. So this will be perfect. People can pick this up and handle it without leaving fingerprints afterwards. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and hit the bell to notify you of our next video. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.